Is it working? You were muted.
Are the mics working?
These are the
Hello?
ones we're going to use for today. And these are the
I don't think they are.
Ms. Thompson, you can see if your mic's
If you
working.
press it green,
Yeah.
hello? Can you hear us?
Hello?
Hello? Do we have?
Can you hear the mics? No.
Can we hear the microphones?
We can just speak loudly.
No,
Okay.
we'll be good. Just give me a second. The important phone here. Okay, we're good.
They're on? Okay. We'd like to call this meeting to order.
Yeah, turn on, I'll try mine. Turn on.
My mic is turned on. I mean, it's green instead of red.
No, they can hear.
Okay, great. We'd like to, I'd like to make a motion to appoint a chairperson.
I second that.
Okay. I'd like to appoint Zachary Kate as chair of the Sexually Oriented Business License Permit and Review Board.
Second.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. So let's go ahead and take a vote then. Everybody who votes to have Zachary Kate chair the Sexually Oriented Business Permit and License Review Board, go ahead and take your vote. My voter is not working. Is yours?
And mine.
Okay,
Can we do a voice
we'll do
vote?
a voice or a raise of hands.
Yes.
Raise of hands if you're a yes.
Say aye.
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 Okay. I'm going to switch seats with you.
So item B on the agenda today is a hearing and possible action concerning the revocation of sexually oriented business permit number 2022-201 issued to 12291 CBW LLC DBA Temptations on July 19th, 2022.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Morning.
Craig Price with the DA's office. I'm not here representing either party. I represent the board. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I believe the first item that was filed late yesterday that should probably be considered by the board is the continuance requested by Temptations. Their attorneys, Roger Albright and Latrice Andrews, are here. The state's represented by Mark Cradaville and Katie Owens.
Good morning. We're not opposed to the continuance. If the board would like to grant it and reschedule it for another date, we're prepared to proceed today if the board would like. So we're happy to go either way.
When was notice sent out for this hearing?
Correspondence was sent to the owner, operator, and on-premises manager for Temptations on May 31st by certified mail.
So notice has been timely sent. It's later than 15 days required by the bylaws for this board, correct?
That is correct.
And my understanding is that based on the complaint, this is a simple fact issue based on the allegations of the director.
That is correct.
I'm happy for the rest of the members of the board to chime in, but I think that given that this has been noticed for longer than the 15 days required and the factual issues at play are relatively simple, I'm not inclined to continue this hearing.
I'd like to-
Mr. Chair, could we be heard on that?
Oh, yes, apologies. Go ahead.
Thank you, Board. My name is Latrice Andrews. I'm the attorney for what's commonly referred to as Temptations. We've requested the continuance. We've attempted to specifically identify the 13 residences that were represented by the administrator to be within 1,000 feet of this business. We don't have a list of specific addresses. We've tried. We'd like to work with them to confirm what these properties are. In addition, we have not been able to identify the other sexually oriented business that is alleged to also be within 1,000 feet. So we're just trying to find out exactly what properties we're talking about so we can adequately prepare. In addition, I think it's of note there's a historical aspect of this property that makes research a little more difficult. Specifically, this Temptations has been around, I believe, since the 70s. So when those original regulations came in, way back when, they were based upon the residents at that time. So since that was an original application, all of it kind of stems back to what was there in the 70s or 80s when it was created. So it's kind of more of a complicated issue than just a fact issue as to let's measure it and see what's there now. It's like, what was the history of it, because it's an original application that's been renewed for decades. Thanks.
And am I correct that the county does have the addresses that are referenced in the complaint?
Yes, we anticipate that will be part of our presentation today.
Okay. With, again, the issue being a fact issue of whether or not these residences are within 1,000 feet, I believe that we have the evidence and there will be an opportunity to rebut that evidence sufficient for us to proceed today. But I'd open it up to the board for any consideration.
I'd like to make a motion to proceed.
I'll second.
All right. Take a voice vote on a motion to deny, on a motion to proceed and deny the continuance requested. All those in agreement say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The county may proceed. Okay.
And may I deliver just a brief opening statement?
Yes, sir.
My name is Mark Cradaville, and I am in the Civil Division of the Tarrant County Criminal District Attorney's Office. I'm here today representing the Tarrant County Administrator's Office. As the board is likely aware, Tarrant County has the statutory authority to adopt regulations over sexually oriented businesses. The county has done so. One of those businesses is to make matters simple, known as Temptations. We anticipate the evidence will show that it goes by a different name for its limited liability corporation on the permit. And the administrator's office, under the regulations, is charged with issuing sexually oriented business permits. A business cannot operate as a sexually oriented business in the unincorporated area of Tarrant County without receiving a permit from the administrator's office. Temptations received a permit. We anticipate the evidence will show that although Temptations has been there for some period of time, the permit it issued today was issued for the first time in 2022. We are seeking today and asking the board to revoke that permit based on requirements under the regulations that prohibit a sexually oriented business from being within 1,000 feet of residential dwellings and other sexually oriented businesses. I will anticipate we'll put on evidence today from Mr. Manius, the Tarrant County Administrator, who's charged under the regulations with issuing permits, from the Tarrant County Transportation Department that conducted measurements to confirm the distance from the sexually oriented business to residential dwellings in another sexually oriented business. And we will be asking the board to revoke this permit at the conclusion of the hearing. Thank you.
Ms. Andrews, do you have an opening statement?
So, as I stated before, the history of the property matters. When you're talking about regulations, when you're talking about zoning, there are protections in law so that the government cannot use its power to simply decide that it doesn't want a business to be there anymore. What's happened here is that there's a business that there may be peripheral issues going on, but this hearing right now is about two issues. One is the distance between this property and 13 residences that have been asserted as being less than 1,000 feet from the sexually oriented business. And the second one is about a sexually oriented business that is claimed to now be within 1,000 feet of Temptations. Now, the issue is timing. When you go back and look at the regulations, they were passed, the 1990 regulations regarding sexually oriented businesses passed in this area. It specifically identifies Temptations as the business that was allowed to operate. And even prior to that, Temptations was a business operating. Under those regulations, those 1,000-foot distances that were suddenly adopted were not going to apply to original applications, original businesses. So it's our position that that 1,000-foot argument doesn't apply to this property because it's grandfathered. So you'll see under, I believe under section 3.004C of your regulations, of the prior SOB regulations, which under 1.3D of the new regulations says would be applying to this proceeding. But 3.004C essentially says that the property distances used are based upon what's happening at the original time of fight. So our original application was way back 70s, 80s. That's the original application. And that's the distance, and that's what we're basing everything on. So based upon those provisions, as well as 9.002, we believe that we understand the attempt to use these new these regulations and the new regulations to try to affect this business's operations, but it's grandfathered. And so we would ask that as we go through this hearing, we remember those provisions and how they apply and how we can't retroactively take away a grandfathered property using regulations that were not applied, especially when there's an exemption in the statute for it. Thank you.
The county would call the Tarrant County Administrator, G.K. Manius, as our first witness. Good morning, Mr. Manius.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the members of the board?
Sure. My name is G.K. Manius. I'm the county administrator here in Tarrant County. As it relates to the permitting aspect, I am considered the director, who is the one who analyzes the applications and then makes recommendations in the permitting process.
And under those regulations, you are referred to as the director on some occasions. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Mr. Manius, I'm going to hand you what I've preliminarily marked as Exhibit 1 here, and I will go ahead and provide a copy to counsel for Temptations. And can you just identify for me what it is that you are looking at?
What this is the regulations that were in existence when the letter to deny or to revoke this permit were in existence.
And were those regulations in place in June and July of 2022?
Yes, they were.
Okay. Members of the board, I have provided county exhibit number 1 to counsel and to the witness. I believe that you should all already have copies of it, but if you require another copy, please let me know. These are the regulations that we're proceeding under today. Would members of the board like a copy of those?
Do all members have a copy?
Yes. Are these the current or the old in Section 4?
These are the regulations that were adopted in the 90s.
Then can I please have a current?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Just so we're sure we're operating off the same ones.
Absolutely.
It's operating off the
Yeah,
same.
yeah. They're the same.
Mr. Manius,
Excuse me, sorry. With regard to your Exhibit 1, I kind of wanted it to be clear that these are the regulations adopted in 1990, but they incorporate subsequent amendments, correct? And that's why they are highlighted and footnotes that reference subsequent commissioner orders.
Yes, that is
So
correct.
it's not the actual one that was passed in the 1990s. It's the one that's current up through prior to the SOB ordinances that y'all are, or regulations that y'all are currently passing, but not the actual 1990 version. It's like the 1998 version with all amendments prior to 19 or
Yes,
after 1990.
I appreciate that clarification. So the copy of what we're looking at here today was originally adopted in the early 1990s, but then subsequently amended several times by multiple commissioner court orders. You'll see in there are footnotes, highlights, cross-outs, and whatnot that reflect the amendments that were made in subsequent commissioner court orders. Now, Mr. Manius, under those regulations as they were in place in 2022, did you receive an application for a sexually oriented business under the trade name of Temptations?
That's correct.
And I'm going to hand you what I've previously marked as exhibit number 2. And I'll provide a copy to council. Mr. Manius, can you identify what it is that you're looking at that is exhibit number 2?
This is the application from Temptations.
And can you identify for me the date that it reflects it was received by your office?
Yes, it was received June 24th, 2022.
And can you identify for me whether this was a application for a new sexually oriented business permit, or was this a renewal?
This was a renewal application.
And how can you tell that?
On page 3 of 3, on question number 20, it asks if this is a first-time application or a renewal application, and it was checked yes, it was a renewal application.
And was there any sort of fee associated with submitting this application?
Yes, there was a $100 fee if it was considered a renewal application.
What is the fee if it's considered a new application?
$350.
And is there a copy of any sort of check or receipt or anything of that nature reflecting that a fee was provided as part of this application?
Yes.
What is the amount of that?
The amount of this check was $100.
Okay. So by all accounts, this was a new renewal application for Temptations?
That's correct.
Okay, very good. And we'll go ahead and provide copies of this exhibit to the members of the board at this time.
Before that's entered into the record, it's got personally identifiable information on there, including social security number and driver's license. So is there a way that that can be redacted before it's made part of the public record?
We have no objection to that being redacted for anything that's put into the record, absolutely.
We're fine with that.
Yeah. Do we need to make a motion? Or just, we're fine with it?
And Mr. Manius, do you know whether you granted this renewal application?
I did not grant this renewal application.
And do you know what the grounds for denying that application were?
The regulations at that time required that any renewal had to be hand-delivered to the administrator's office at least 20 days prior to the expiration of the permit.
Okay, very good. Did you notify the applicant that it was being denied?
Yes, I did.
And do you know how you went about notifying the applicant?
Yes, I sent them a letter, a registered letter.
Okay. I'm going to hand you what I previously marked as State's Exhibit number 3. Or again, I should say County Exhibit number 3. Sorry, force of habit. I'll provide a copy of that to council as well. And can you identify for me what that exhibit is?
Yes, this is a copy of a letter that I sent, which was dated June 24th, 2022, advising Temptations that their permit for renewal had been denied.
Did you receive any subsequent contact from Temptations regarding this application denial?
Yes. On July 11th of 2022, we received a new license or a new application for a license.
I'm going to hand you what I've previously marked as Exhibit 4. Can you identify what it is that you're looking at in Exhibit 4?
Yes, this is the document that was sent to us by RCI Management Services, and this was a new application. It was not a renewal application. It was a first-time applicant, and this was for Temptations.
And let me pause for just one moment. For members of the board, at this time, I would like to ask that Exhibits 1 through 4 be entered into the record of the board.
I'll take that. Yeah, I'm in agreement with that, except with the caveat that there needs to be redactions on Exhibit 3 for personally identifiable information. So we have copies of that, and prior to it being put in the public record, we'll have county staff redact that information.
I would just add, if the concern is for personally identifiable information, it would likely have to have the same redactions on 4 as well, since that is a similar application.
If there's any personally identifiable information on the exhibits, just let's make sure that that is redacted prior to being put in the public record.
Absolutely. Mr. Manius, can you tell me what the date on that application is as to when you received it at your office?
We received that application on July 11th, 2022.
And you mentioned a minute ago that this reflected that it was an application for a new permit.
That's correct.
How do you know that?
So on page 3 of the application, on item number 20, it is checked first-time application.
And is there a fee associated with a first-time application?
Yes, there is.
What is that fee amount?
$350.
And is there a reflection that that amount was paid as part of this application?
That's correct. We received a check for $350 with this application.
So by all accounts, this is an application for a brand-new sexually oriented business permit under the regulations?
Yes, sir.
What was your response to this application?
So we received the application, and at that time we did not have any comments from the neighborhood nor from law enforcement about any criminal activity or any other type of activities. I will tell you that our due diligence was incomplete, in that my office made a mistake as it relates to not conducting a more thorough due diligence on this, and so we issued a new permit.
And did you inform the applicant of your decision to issue the permit?
Yes.
How did you inform them?
We provided them with a new permit, also with a transmittal letter from my office to Temptations.
And I'm going to go ahead and provide you with what I've marked as Exhibit 5. Provide a copy to council. And can you please describe what you're holding?
Right. So what this is a letter which is dated July 19th, 2022. And in this letter, we say that the permit was approved. It was for a one-year period, and that the expiration date was July 19th, 2023.
As part of that transmittal letter, did you provide a copy of the new permit as well?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to hand you what I previously marked as Exhibit 6. Council. Is that a copy of the permit that was provided along with that transmittal letter?
That's correct.
Okay. And can you tell me what the permit number is reflected there?
Permit number is 2022-201.
And we would ask the board to go ahead and admit Exhibits 5 and 6 into evidence at this point, into the record.
Admitted. Again, with the stipulation that any personally identifiable information is being redacted.
Thank you. And I don't believe these two exhibits would have anything of that nature, but if in fact they do, we will certainly make an effort to redact that. Mr. Manius, you'd indicated that there was an expiration date on that permit.
That's correct.
And when is that expiration date?
It's July 19th, 2023.
After issuing the permit, did you take any subsequent action as it relates to this permit?
Yes, I did.
What was that?
So on May 31st of this year, after hearing complaints from the residents and also law enforcement activities out there, we reviewed this application and found that, as I said, our due diligence was not as it should have been. And under the current regulations at that time, I issued a letter that revoked, stating that I was revoking the license. That letter was dated May 31st.
And when you say the regulations at that time, you're referencing the regulations that I previously provided to you as Exhibit 1?
That's correct.
And under those regulations, before taking any action to revoke a permit, are you required to send a letter to the owner and operator?
Yes, that's correct.
And under those regulations, are you required to give them any sort of information in that correspondence?
Yes.
What is the information you're required to provide to them?
So on this particular one, it was a distance requirement, both residential and the existence of another sexually oriented business that were within 1,000 feet of the property line.
I'm going to provide you what I've marked as Exhibit 7. Is that a copy of the correspondence that you sent to the owner and operator of Temptations?
Yes, it is.
And does it reflect in there that there is an investigation as to whether there's probable cause to revoke the permit?
Yes.
And you specified in there that it was because of the distance requirements?
That's correct.
So going back to what the regulations call for that were in place at this time, is there a ground for revocation that is applicable to this situation?
Yes, there is.
What is that?
As in that particular set of regulations, that it allows for a revocation of a license if the permit should not have been issued in the first place because of criteria which are set out in the regulations for denial of a permit.
And the letter specifies that that's the ground you're seeking to revoke the permit based on?
That's correct.
That it should never have been issued in the first place?
That's correct.
And again, this is the new permit that your office issued in 2022?
That's correct.
Does the letter reflect what date it was sent?
Yes, this document was sent May 31st, 2023.
Did you receive any sort of response from Temptations or anyone representing Temptations after this letter was sent?
We have, as it relates to what we have received since then, we have received an application for a renewal of an existing permit.
So a renewal of the application, a renewal application for permit 2022-201?
That's correct.
Has there been any other contact from Temptations or anyone representing them regarding the proposed revocation?
Not to my knowledge. There may be. I need to check my files. I simply don't have an answer to that question.
And have you made a decision as to?
Excuse me. I did see a copy. It was not addressed to me, but a request for an extension of this hearing.
For this hearing today?
That's correct.
Under your direction, did any Tarrant County departments conduct an investigation as to whether Temptations was within 1,000 feet of residential dwellings or another sexually oriented business?
Yes.
And what department was that?
That was the Transportation Services Department of the county.
Can you briefly describe what that department does?
That department is responsible for centralized transportation activities in the county. They also do surveys and striping.
And in the Tarrant County governmental organization, is the Transportation Services Department under your authority?
Yes, it is.
And so at your direction, they carried out taking measurements to confirm the distance requirements?
That's correct.
And I apologize, members of the board, I don't believe I've asked for Exhibit 7 to be entered. That's the letter from Mr. Manius's office, so at this time I would ask for that letter to be entered into the record.
The letter is admitted.
Mr. Manius, have you made a decision as to whether Temptations is in violation of the regulations that were in place when your office issued this permit?
Yes, I have.
What is that decision?
Decision is that the permit should not have been issued because of the 1,000 feet. Since this was a new application, that there within 1,000 feet of the property lines there were residential structures, and also there was another sexually oriented business.
Are you asking the board to revoke this permit today?
Yes, I am.
We'll pass the witness.
Ms. Andrews, do you have any questions?
Can you tell me when you started re-reviewing the application that was submitted in June of 2022?
It was shortly after we began to receive information from the citizens that came to court, Commissioner's Court, to testify. Also because of activities that I personally read in the newspaper and in the media about physical violence that was happening at Temptations.
And was it also around this time that you were working on, I guess, adopting new regulations related to sexually oriented businesses in this area?
We were not. We were beginning to look at those regulations. I believe that we had initially started this review prior to that, though.
Okay. And when did you, I guess, start preparing for the new SOB regulations?
Probably within the last 6 weeks. I think that would be the proper time.
And with regard to Temptation specifically, you don't dispute that you issued the permit for this property for the year 2022?
That's correct.
And you also issued the permit in the prior years, correct? In I guess all the prior years that it's been operating, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And I understand you've been the administrator here for a few decades.
At least 3 decades.
Okay. And as part of that, you were familiar with the original SOB regulations that were passed in the 1990s, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And part of that. And as part of that, y'all conducted a study, correct?
Yes.
And in that study, do you recall that it mentioned Temptations?
I cannot recall.
Okay. But you do recall that there was a study back in 1990 related to the adoption of the regulations
Yes,
that
ma'am. Yes,
formed
ma'am.
the core of what were the regulations prior to the June 6th version.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Are you familiar with the grandfathering provisions?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Are you also familiar with, or in your role as administrator, were you given discretion in issuing permits?
There were certain things that I could take into consideration, and so I could take those into consideration as I would issue the permits.
Is it fair to say that the reason, is it fair to say that you exercised discretion in issuing the permit after it was filed, I guess it seems untimely, by Temptations?
Yes.
And part of your job is the exercise of discretion.
That's correct.
And so in issuing the permit, did you have any reason to have concerns regarding the 1,000 square foot the distance requirements based upon exercising your discretion?
So, as I stated previously, we failed to do adequate due diligence on this. And so since we did not have a complaint from the neighborhood, and I had no police reports at the time, that's the reason that I went ahead and renewed the permit.
So in 2022, you're stating that there were no complaints by residents?
What I'm saying is that our office was not aware of any complaints.
Okay. And in 2022, your office, it had not escalated, I guess, to the point where you were brought in to be made aware of complaints or police reports or anything?
Our office was not aware of that.
Okay. So if it's within your discretion to grant a permit, why is it now, is it also, I guess, are you just exercising your discretion to just take it away?
As it relates to the residential areas, our office had not received any complaints. When we were made aware that there were issues that the residents in that area had concerns about, that was the basis for us to revoke this, because we went back and re-examined the distances and realized that that should have been something that we should have taken into consideration when we did the renewal of the permit, and we failed to do that.
Is it fair to say that this sudden concern about distance is a pretext related to maybe the nuisance action that's being filed?
Members of the board, I'm going to object to that based on both relevance and that it's asking for a legal conclusion from this witness.
This is an informal evidentiary hearing. Then is this subject to Texas rules of evidence?
I believe that would be at the discretion of the board as to whether to bring that into consideration here. I agree it is an informal hearing, but I believe the board still has discretion as to what it will allow to hear and be asked from witnesses.
Ms. Andrews, could you ask the question again?
Yes. In your opinion,
Yes, sir.
is the distance requirement a pretext to attempt to close down this business? Here, I'll leave it there.
And the objection was on the basis of relevance?
Yes, that would be my objection based on that.
May I respond?
Yes.
I think it's critically relevant. This witness has testified that he has the discretion to grant a permit and even exercise the provisions under this, which would allow the grandfathering provisions that allow this business to operate to be in place. If now all of a sudden we're going back and saying that these distance requirements are going to be what causes it, and it's directly tied to the same complaints that undergird the nuisance litigation that's being filed, I think it's pertinent to know that to know whether or not we're trying to use something that has already been approved, already went through, already had the discretion or exercise within discretion to simply undercut another lawsuit in another case. Because if it was properly issued, if he had the authority to allow this grandfathered permit to remain in effect, then one, the complaints that he's hearing about wouldn't really matter. And the fact that that's what mattered and just drove all of this to the forefront kind of proves my point that the distance requirements, there was an untimely application. It was approved with his discretion, said it was okay, we'll let it continue operating. And then suddenly, the timing with the nuisance lawsuit, it's now a problem. I think it matters.
But along the same lines, and I think your line of questioning had dealt with Mr. Manius's discretion, pretext or not, it is in the discretion of the director under the SOBs to, regardless of motivation, it asks the director and it asks this board, is there a dwelling or an enterprise within 1,000 feet? So regardless of what the motivation is, it's not particularly relevant as long as the director has the authority, correct?
I would respectfully disagree because I think a little scary when authority can be given and taken at the whim. And I think that our client had the right to operate for the year in which it was given a permit to operate. And for a reason that had been looked into previously, granted now they regret the level of diligence looked into, but it was looked at by this office, approved by this office, and discretion was expressly authorized to allow it to continue under its grandfather provision, noting that the permit number is 201, which is the same permit number that it previously had. So it does appear to not actually be a new permit. And so they allowed the grandfather to continue, and to now retroactively, only with the timing so close to the nuisance action and timing so close to the newly adopted regs that are clearly targeted at this business as well, I think it matters what that discretion can do.
And I'll open it up to the board if the board wants to chime in, but motivation is not a factor under the SOB, so I wouldn't find that the questioning is relevant.
I agree.
I'll sustain the county's objection.
With regard to the distance, or with regard to the permit number, you would agree that the permit number is 201, correct?
Correct.
And that was the permit number that it previously had.
Yes.
I pass the witness.
Redirect.
Yes, briefly. Mr. Manius, in Exhibit 1, the regulations, can you turn to page 11, and it would appear to be section 3.004, subsection C. And just let me know when you're there, please.
I do have it. Yes.
Can you please just read for me the very first sentence of subsection 3004C?
It says, property uses and distances for original applications shall be determined as of the time that the application was filed.
And going back to what we discussed previously, the application that you received in July of 2022 stated that it was a new application. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it had the requisite fee for a new application?
Yes, it did.
And so based on 3.004C, this was an original application and distances were determined for use at the time in July 2022 that it was received?
That's correct.
In those same regulations, can you turn 2 pages further on to page 13 and then subsection 3.004, I'm sorry, subsection G?
Yes.
Is there a provision there in subsection G that allows there to be an exemption from the distance requirements?
So there are 3 different exemptions or considerations, not exemptions, but yes, there are.
To your knowledge, and going back just a moment there, what is the body that grants an exemption under that section?
It is the board.
And that would be this body, correct?
That's correct.
To your knowledge, does your file reflect that an exemption has been granted for permit 2022-201 by the Sexually Oriented Business Board?
No.
So we've talked a little bit about the fact that this was an original application because of the fact that the renewal deadline was missed. And I'd like you to think back in your file. Have there been other instances when this same sexually oriented business has missed its renewal date?
Yes.
Do you have any idea how many times that may have occurred?
1, possibly 2.
Okay. So that would be in addition
to my recollection.
That would be in addition to the missed renewal date that is at issue in 2022?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Pass the witness.
Anything further, Ms. Andrews?
And in each of those times that if the renewal date had been missed, it was this renewal application that was filed, correct? on prior instances?
I'm sorry, I asked you a question.
Well, that was a bad question, so that's probably why you didn't understand. That permit was continually renewed, correct?
Yes.
And it wasn't until May 31st of 2023 that there's suddenly an issue, correct?
Yes, the permits, this particular establishment was grandfathered in initially. And so then it appeared as a renewal of an application. And since we did not hear any complaints about the establishment in our office, then I continued to renew the permit. I hope that, I think I'm answering your question.
Yes, and so the grandfather remained in effect this entire period in your office and how y'all process the application?
No, the grandfathering was for existing businesses, and they were basically treated as not having to go through the new permit process. And so if any time that there would be a violation that would subject that to be a new permit, and in our files there were at least a couple of times, once, maybe twice. I'll need to look at my files again. At that point, in my opinion, the grandfathering ended because their existing permit that they had been authorized to receive through the grandfather clause had gone away. And so they applied as a new applicant.
But prior to this application, when their renewal application was rejected, all of them were renewal applications that were submitted, correct?
No, I'll need to go back and look at my file real quick, but no, there were renewal applications, but there was also renewal applications because they missed the deadline.
And then with regard to the permit number on each of the permits it received the same permit number, correct?
I'll need to go back and look, but it's my understanding that it did, yes.
I'll show you what's been marked as. So, it's been marked as Exhibit G, and this is just this is just the permits that have been
Thank you.
the permits that have been issued since there was the transfer in 2011 from the prior owner. And do they all say? Do you see where it says -2001?
I see -201.
Sorry, yes, I apologize. -201, and each of them have that same permit number, correct?
Yes,
If you
ma'am,
flip
they do.
through.
Yes, it is.
I approach the board. I have a copy.
You may.
I might just slide it down there. So in all these years, there was never actually a new permit issued. It was always permit 201, correct?
There was the new permit numbers had the calendar or the year that it was issued.
Yes.
So those have always changed.
So the year would
But the two-
change.
Yes, and that then made that a new permit number.
I pass the witness.
Nothing further from the county?
Mr. Manies, thank you for your time. You're excused.
Thank you, sir.
Does the county have a next witness?
Yes, the county we call Randy Skinner.
Morning. Please state your name, sir.
Randall Skinner. I am Director of Transportation Services for Tarrant County.
Morning, Mr. Skinner. I asked Mr. Manius earlier to describe what the Transportation Department does, but could you describe that in your own words, please?
Sure. We're responsible for all transportation-related activities in terms of design, support for any county projects. We also manage the bond programs, transportation bond programs. We do our own surveying, our striping, responsible for central garage activities and sign fabrication.
And so is it a regular duty of your department to take measurements of physical locations?
Our survey crew is responsible for providing survey activities for county projects, yes.
And when you say survey activities, can you describe what that means?
That would be essentially providing boundary surveys, primarily for right-of-way purposes.
And distances would be an important part of that?
That's correct.
So to put a finer point on it, your department is capable and has the responsibility for taking distance measurements in the county?
Yes.
Were you asked to take distance measurements for a property that is a sexually oriented business on Highway 30?
Yes.
And did you take those measurements?
We did. We were asked to put together the exhibit that shows straight line measurements from the Temptations property to nearby structures within 1,000 feet of the Temptations property line.
And can you describe the way that you went about taking these measurements?
So the measurements were essentially survey grade level measurements. We have with us our surveyor today who may be able to expound on that somewhat.
I'm going to hand you two exhibits that I previously marked as exhibits 8 and 9. And can you first look at exhibit number 8 and tell me if you recognize that document?
I do.
And what exactly is it?
This document was prepared by our GIS analyst in our department and shows the using GIS a straight line measurement from the Temptations property line to structures or properties within 1,000 feet.
And I just want to nail down that term that you use there, GIS. Can you tell us what that means?
Geographic Information Systems.
And what exactly is that?
And so that is a software that allows for the analysis of data and boundaries, vector type information such as roads and property lines and such.
And is that a tool that you use in your regular course of business in the transportation department?
We do.
So what sort of things would you use GIS for?
We use GIS for tracking a lot of the permits that we are maintain in our department. We also use that for any analysis having to do with buffers. So, for instance, we have in there, just as an example, the noise zones that are associated with the Naval Air Station, so that we can be able to track development that's occurring within those noise zones.
How reliable is GIS?
It is reliable. While it is not a boundary survey level, it is reliable for the purposes of general mapping.
Can you look at document that I've marked as Exhibit 9?
Yes.
Can you tell me what that is?
So our surveyor actually went out and performed a similar function by taking straight line measurements from the Temptations property boundary to other boundaries or other properties within the 1,000-foot radius.
And so document number 9 was made by somebody in the transportation department at your direction?
That's correct.
And the same with 8, it was made at your direction by the
Yes.
transportation department?
Yes.
We'd like to go ahead and enter into evidence county exhibits 8 and 9 at this point.
They're admitted.
And if the board would permit, I have a blown up version of exhibit 9 that I'd like to display for demonstrative purposes.
You may proceed.
Yeah, it would probably be best if I did that. So, Mr. Skinner, we're looking at a blown-up version of Exhibit 9. Again, this was made by your department, correct? Oh,
Turn
sorry.
there.
Thank you.
Sure.
This was made by your department, correct?
That's correct.
And Exhibit 9, the version that you're looking at, is the same as what we're looking at in this blown-up version. Is that correct?
It appears to be,
It's
yes.
a larger version, fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. Can you identify for us which one of these buildings is Temptations?
This building, located right here.
With the sort of striped outline
Yes,
on it?
correct.
And that's the whole property tract of Temptations, right? Correct. And what is the red circle?
The red circle represents the 1,000-foot boundary, or buffer.
From the tract of property that
Correct.
Temptations sits on. Okay. And if we're looking at the text that's on here, what are the, what's the yellow text represent? Please, I know it's hard to see, it's 9, that's not going up there. So you just,
So our survey crew, based on field operations, made determinations as to the land use or the use of that property.
your team made determinations as to how the property was used?
Correct.
And how did they go about doing that?
Just field observation.
Field observations, such as what?
I guess I'd probably need to defer to our surveyor for a
Okay.
little more detail on how
Understood.
they actually went about that.
Understood. But on this, it reflects the determinations of your team as to whether something is a residential property or not. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. And based on what you're seeing on Exhibit 9, are there residential properties within that 1,000-foot buffer zone?
Based on the field observations that we have taken in our office and our review of the Tarrant Appraisal District data, yes, there appear to be residential properties in that 1,000-foot zone.
Okay. And who in your office conducted this survey? Or created these measurements?
Our surveyor,
Okay. What's his name?
Bob Viscone.
Thank you. So if you'll go with me here, can we look up in the right-hand corner, the left-hand corner from where I'm standing looking at the map. Are there some addresses written on there?
Yes.
And what do those addresses reflect?
Those addresses reflect those residential dwellings, again, based on observed observation, that exist within the 1,000-foot boundary.
Okay, so I just want to nail that down. So looking at Exhibit 9, we have a list of the specific addresses that your department has determined are within 1,000-foot buffer zone of temptation.
Residential, yes.
Residential, thank you. So can you just count for me, how many residences did your team determine was in the 1,000-foot
I
buffer?
think that there are 18, I believe, that are shown on our map.
Okay, 18 total. So let's just look at a few of them here. Primarily down in the right-hand corner where most of the residents are. Would you agree with that?
Primarily.
Okay. Is there one that's sort of oddly situated here behind what appears to be a commercial building?
It appears that way, and again, based on our field observations, that may very well be a residential use.
Okay, very good. Was there another type of structure that your team was taking measurements for besides residential buildings?
We took measurements for all the properties that were within 1,000 feet.
Are you aware of another sexually oriented business that you were taking a measurement from Temptation, correct?
Yes.
And do you know what that business was?
The business is located to the west. The address is slipping my mind, but it is an adult bookstore that is within 624 feet from property boundary to property boundary of Temptations.
And on Exhibit 9, is that reflected with a second sort of striped pattern around that other sexually oriented business?
Yes.
Okay. And so Based on the observations and measurements that your team conducted, did you reach any conclusion as to whether there are residences within 1,000 feet of Temptation?
So based again on our field observations and the information we were able to gather from the Tarrant Appraisal District, there are residential structures within that 1,000 feet, as well as the other sexually oriented business.
And do you know how you were able to determine that this was another sexually oriented business?
From our research in the Tarrant Appraisal District, as well as field observations.
I'll pass the witness.
Ms. Andrews?
When you conducted, this field observation and created these, and did your research, did you investigate or look into when any of these properties, these residential properties were constructed?
Yes, we do have some information for some of those properties.
And was it your determination that they were built before or after the Temptations started operating?
Well, I can tell you that the earliest residential dwelling structure that we've been able to determine based on Tarrant Appraisal District was constructed in 1960. And the most recent, from our review of the appraisal district data, was constructed in 2012. I'm sorry, 2015.
And what property do you have listed as being constructed in 1960?
12112 Linkhaven Drive.
What was that property address?
12112 Linkhaven Drive.
And what was the distance of that property?
Actually, I don't have that information readily available to me.
And then can you tell me when you measured, can you tell me at what point you started and where you ended? Did you measure like from property line to property line? Did you measure?
So the measurements were taken from property boundary to others' property. So on the, let me make sure I'm telling you correctly, Exhibit 8 is actually showing measurements from the property line to what appears to be actual structures.
So the Linkhaven Drive property, it's your testimony that it was measured from the property line of Temptations to the structure of 12112 Linkhaven Drive?
Yes.
And your testimony is that that house was built in what year?
1960, based on the Tarrant Appraisal District records.
And and you don't know how far it is or what the distance is right now?
I don't have that information readily available.
Are you aware that there was a study done in the 1990s that found that there was one residence, but it was around like over 1,000 feet within of Temptations?
I'm not.
But again, you don't know exactly, you don't know how far or this is from Temptations at all at this point.
Not readily available.
And other than what's after 1960, what's the date of the next property that you're aware of?
I do want to clarify one thing. Sorry, on that property you're referring to, that was based on the list that we have been reviewing from the Tarrant Appraisal District that does show all properties within the 1,000-foot buffer. So from that perspective, it would be located within 1,000 feet.
And it would depend upon how reliable the system is that you're using, correct?
Yes.
And when was it that you started doing, when you were engaged to first start doing these measurements?
Oh, goodness. I think it's been at least maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago maybe.
So it was in June?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
Are you aware that the allegation of the distance issue was at the end of May?
I'm not aware of when that actually came
Okay.
about. I'm not entirely sure exactly the date that we were engaged to do this.
That's fine.
That's purely a guess.
And kind of can you tell me what you were instructed to do or what your task was?
We were asked to prepare this exhibit that shows the straight line measurements from that property boundary to other structures.
And were you told why?
I was under the impression it had to do with the permit for Temptations.
And the SOB bookstore Nazarian, did you do any research regarding how old that business was?
No,
Did you look into when it first got its permit?
I did not.
So is it fair to say you don't know whether that business was there before or after?
I can't speak to
this is-
that. Our charge was primarily to prepare the measurement.
Right. But I just want to be clear, you're not able to testify as to which of these businesses came first?
I cannot.
Okay, I pass this. Witness.
Any redirect?
Yes, briefly, please. Mr. Skinner, you mentioned a moment ago there was a list that you were referring to that shows the dates of construction of some residences. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
I'm going to hand you what I've marked as or County's Exhibit 10. Can you tell me what that is?
This appears to be the list that we derived from the Tarrant Appraisal District.
And so this is something that your department put together?
Yes, from their data, yes.
And it reflects the year of construction of a number of the residences that you believe to be within a 1,000-foot boundary. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can you tell me which column reflects the year built?
It would be the third column titled Year Built.
And so there's some highlighting on this, some yellow and some blue. Can you tell me what that indicates?
I have drawn a blank, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
Can't answer that.
So the third column reflects year built, correct?
Correct.
And then we have a fourth column there that reflects what the property is used for. Is that correct?
Correct.
And on the first two pages of this exhibit, that's the structure, those are the structures that are within 1,000 feet of Temptations?
Correct.
Okay. Are there some structures on this list in the first two pages that indicate they are residential properties?
Yes.
Are there some structures on the first two pages of this document that indicate they were built prior to 2022?
Yes.
Now, let's talk about the pages after the first two. Can you tell me what those pages of this spreadsheet are?
This is more of an expanded version of the Tarrant Appraisal District data.
So again, just to clarify, this is all data that your group derived from the Tarrant Appraisal District.
Correct.
And it's publicly available data.
Correct.
We move to admit County Exhibit number 10 at this point.
It's admitted.
Going back to when you were asked to make these measurements, you're unsure on the timeline of when exactly you were tasked with that?
I don't recall the exact date.
Do you know if it was prior to May 31st?
It may have been. I don't recall.
Have you reached a conclusion as to whether there are residential dwellings within 1,000 feet of Temptations?
Based on our field observations and the Tarrant Appraisal District data, there do appear to be residential structures within 1,000 feet of Temptations.
Have you reached a conclusion as to whether there is another sexually oriented business within 1,000 feet of Temptations?
As well, based on our field observations and Tarrant Appraisal District data, there does appear to be another sexually oriented business within 1,000 feet of Temptations.
I'll pass the witness.
I've got a quick question. On Exhibit 10, and I know y'all said this, I just want to be clear and make sure I understand. The highlighted addresses are addresses within 1,000 feet of the business, correct?
Actually, all of these
Oh, all of these are.
are, yes.
Okay. Ms. Andrews?
Yes. The sexually oriented business that I guess it's called Nazarian on this map, on Exhibit 8, was it open and operating?
When this map was prepared,
When you did your field observation?
I personally was not out in the field. I would have to refer to my surveyor. I believe that it was, but I would have to have him.
Do you know if it's open and operating now?
I have no idea.
And then the Link Haven property you referred to at 1221, oh, that's a lot of numbers. 12112, there we go. Link Haven. Can you tell me where it is on this map? The enlarged one, could you locate it?
12112. Not finding the address right off. I don't have the, I can't find the address right off.
And that's fine. And then just on Exhibit 8, when you see the arrows with the trajectory coming out on Exhibit 8,
Yeah.
I noticed, let's say, there's a line that has 1002.02 as is that the length of that line or the distance in feet for that line?
That's the straight line distance in feet.
Okay. And it's more than 1,000 feet, correct? Because it says 1002.02.
I'm looking for that particular line. I'm not sure I see that. Oh, I see what you're referring to. Yes.
And then even though that's over 1,000 feet, it still has blue outlining to the right of it, correct? Like after the arrow ends. Do you see that?
Because the 1,000-foot boundary actually clips a portion of that property. So basically, what we did in GIS is we took the property boundary for Temptations and applied a 1,000-foot boundary buffer across that. So it picked that up because it's clipping the property boundary.
But so the blue circle would extend, essentially it does extend beyond 1,000 feet if you're looking at that 1,000-foot buffer zone, correct?
The 1,000-foot buffer should be reflective of 1,000 feet from the. I want to make sure I'm telling you this correctly because the straight line distances that you're seeing are actually from the property boundary of Temptations.
Correct.
So yes, that should be 1,000 feet.
Okay, but if that straight line is measuring 1,002.002, that's more than 1,000, correct?
Yes.
And then the blue circle also extends past that, correct? Does the blue circle extend past the 1,002 line?
It very well may be that the 1,002 measurement is to the edge of that blue circle.
But you don't know that, correct?
I can't speak 100% to that, but it's what I believe it to be.
But the blue circle does extend beyond 1,000 feet if you look at that line, correct?
And that may be, possibly, it may be a function of the way that GIS
Because it depends on how reliable that system is, correct?
Correct.
And so this may not actually reflect the 1,000-foot, just a 1,000-foot barrier, correct? Or buffer zone?
Well, I believe it's, again, GIS, as we mentioned before, is not survey level. It's a mapping software. And so that's the reason why we asked our survey crew to go back and take a look at what essentially is Exhibit 9.
I pass the witness.
Brief
Nothing.
reader. Okay, good.
Nothing further from the county.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
County would call Bob Fiscone. Morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the board?
Bob Biscombe, I'm surveyor for Tarrant County.
And so you work for Mr. Skinner.
Yes, yes, I
And
do.
can you describe what your duties are in the transportation department?
Primarily, I'm responsible for overseeing all types of surveying functions for the county.
And do you have any professional qualifications that allow you to do that?
I'm a registered professional surveyor. I have been since 2002.
And who are you registered with?
Texas Board of Professional Engineers and Land Surveyor.
And what's your educational background?
I have an associate's degree in applied science in forestry with emphasis in surveying.
And are you current on your qualifications that would allow you to conduct
Yes,
surveys?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay. How long have you worked as a surveyor?
As a registered surveyor since 2002. I began surveying in 1980
So,
under the direction of a registered surveyor.
so you have approximately 40 years of experience in surveying?
Yes, sir.
Were you asked to conduct some surveys in relation to temptations?
Yes, I was.
And what did you do to carry out those surveys?
Our first attempt was to locate property corners. Once we located a series of them by GPS, global possession system measurements, we established a coordinate based on state plane coordinates.
And to get that information, were you looking at maps? Did you go out in the field? What was your first step here?
Our first step was looking at previous maps and with their dimensions, and by rough measuring between known points, locating these property corners.
And what did you do once you located the property corners?
At that point, then we did make field measurements.
And that means what exactly?
In this case, it was GPS observations to get position in relationship to state plane coordinates. And then I compared those distances with record distances, those in plats and descriptions.
Now, is this something you did entirely from your office, or did you actually physically travel out to the scene to conduct these measurements?
We did this, we took our measurements in the field, analyzed the work in the office.
Understood. And when you go out in the field, what exactly are you doing out there to take measurements? Are you using tools of any nature?
Yes, we are using survey grade GPS equipment.
And would that be industry standard for taking survey measurements?
Yes, it would.
How reliable are those measurements?
They are reliable.
Can you describe the sort of things that would be used, that these survey measurements would be used for? For example, construction. What exactly do people use this information for?
Construction, boundary, GIS will use that. Pretty much anything that requires precise measurements.
And how precise are they?
one in, well, GPS will vary depending on its distance. It's probably within a tenth of a foot maximum. Most generally, it's closer than that. We're getting results when we compare it with other types of measurements within a half an inch.
And is that about the level of precision that is applicable?
That's what we strive. We strive for a half an inch.
And is that what you strove for in
Yes.
these measurements?
Yes, it was.
Let's take a look at Exhibit 9, and it's this demonstrative poster here. Did you create this?
Yes, sir, I did.
And is this based on the measurements you were just talking about from the field?
Yes, sir.
And so when you went out to this location, can you kind of describe for us generally where you were at?
We were at the northeast corner would be probably the beginning of what is known as Temptations.
So northeast corner, somewhere over here by the highway?
Beginning right here.
Okay.
We did find monumentation at that point. It was the same size iron as what was found from one of my predecessors in 1998. We found the southeast corner of what Temptations is occupying now, and the southeast, further down south, the southeast corner of what is actually described in one of 3 tracks from the landowner.
And was those measurements that you took in the field that allowed you to determine the 1,000-foot buffer? That's the red circle?
Yes.
And so this 1,000-foot buffer would be accurate to about a tenth of a foot based on what you were saying earlier. Is that fair to say?
I would say from based on our measurements, yes.
And so you created this map, right?
Yes.
And in creating that, you indicated what the different uses for some of these structures are. Is that correct?
Yes.
So can you tell me what notations you made as to the uses of the structures that are here on here? So, what exactly does the yellow indicate? Let me put it differently.
Yellow is based on our observation, was residential dwellings.
Okay. And what observations led you to conclude that these were residential dwellings?
Vehicles parked in the driveway, garage structures attached, fenced yards, manicured lawns, people outside working, yard work, whatnot.
And so based on those observations, you took your measurements and created this map and indicated residential structures in yellow. Is that correct?
Correct.
Based on your field observations and your measurements on these maps, did you come to any conclusions as to whether Temptations is within 1,000 feet of residential dwellings?
Yes.
What was that conclusion?
The conclusion there were several that fell within inside this 1,000-foot radius, and I gave the address on the upper.
And that's indicated up
the
here?
upper left-hand corner is our opinion of the residential structures within 1,000 foot.
Okay, so just to be clear, these are the addresses that you determined are within 1,000 feet of
Yes.
Temptations that
Yes.
are residences?
Yes.
Okay. Did you make any conclusions as to whether there was another sexually oriented business within 1,000 feet of Temptations?
Yes.
What was your conclusion on that?
Yes, there is.
And where is that indicated on this map?
It would be further to the west. Furthest building west on this map.
How did you conclude that was a sexually oriented business?
A, by the advertisement on the building. B, doing a search on the internet for the address.
Do you recall what the advertisement on the building was?
Super X Video, I believe.
What was the internet search that you conducted? What did that reveal?
Same, similar.
I'll pass the witness.
With regard to that business, did you check to see if it had an SOB permit?
No, I did not.
So we don't know whether that's actually a sexually oriented business as defined under the code that's operating, correct?
Me personally, no, I do not know.
Okay. And then, and to be clear, you didn't go inside to see what they were selling? You didn't?
No.
Okay. And when you did your field work, did you enter the property of Temptations?
Could you describe the property?
Were you within the bounds of their property?
Yes.
Okay. Did you discuss that with the owner?
No.
And did you have permission to be on the property?
No.
And when was this specifically that you were there?
First week of June.
And when were you first tasked with going out there?
Around the 1st of June. I don't know the exact date. I would have to look back on.
And what was the understanding of your task that you'd been assigned?
My task was I was asked to determine all residential structures within 1,000 feet of the property line of Temptations.
And are you aware of where 12112 Link Haven is on that map?
12112?
Yes.
Would you tilt that so the board can see?
12112.
Okay. I don't have anything else. I pass one.
Any redirect?
Nothing further from the county.
Thank you for your time.
County rests its case.
Would the appellant like to call witnesses?
No witnesses.
Do we have any closing arguments?
Members of the board, this is a relatively straightforward ask that we have, and that's that the board revoke permit 2022-201 based on the ground that it simply should not have been issued in the first place. I believe the evidence today has established two things. One, that this is a new original application for this SOB permit that was received by the county administrator's office in July of 2022. Because of that, any issue regarding grandfathering, estoppel, anything of that nature was waived. And as Mr. Manius testified, this is not the first time that this SOB has missed its renewal deadline. So we would assert that that waives any issue as to grandfathering. Second, it is within 1,000 feet of a number of residences and another sexually oriented business. That is a violation of the county's duly adopted sexually oriented business regulations. Based on that, the permit should not have been issued. The regulations allow a permit to be revoked if it should not have been issued based specifically on the distance requirements. No exemption has been granted by this board to this sexually oriented business for the distance requirements. And based on that, we're asking the board to revoke the permit.
So this is the first time this board has actually existed, I believe. I don't know if there's a prior board. But to assert that because there was not an exemption granted by a board that did not really exist until now as a basis of not allowing the exemption to apply is simply incorrect and inequitable. The administrator who's been granting these permits and running this office and doing this for almost 3 decades, granted this as a renewal, has been renewing this permit regularly. And to now create a board for the first time, people sworn in today, for them to now say, well, we need to undo it all, is inequitable and unfair in a capitalist society where we're running businesses. Be clear that what's being asked here is that a business be shut down, one that's been part of this county for several decades, operating for decades at this location, mentioned in the 1990 regs already having been established and likely in the 1979 version of the regs. In those prior regs, there was one residence that could have been close enough, but they found, after measurements and everything, that it was okay to operate, and it's been continuing to operate. With regard to the new residences that have been built, those, unfortunately, are after the fact. The grandfather is still in effect. The discretion of the administrator applies. The fact that a non-existent board didn't grant an exemption when the person who had the authority to do so did and allowed the grandfathering to continue demonstrates that the permit that they have is in effect and it's allowed to continue to operate. There are other issues. I understand that this county wants to address, but this is not the means of doing it. I think head-on addressing the real issue rather than creating a pretext of a board that's newly created to do this is unfair and unjust. With regard to the sexually oriented business that is allegedly within 1,000 feet, one, nobody has put on any evidence of there actually being a permitted sexually oriented business. The only thing you've heard is hearsay is like, I Googled it. I saw a sign. You have not heard of a permit for another sexually operated business. You don't even know if that enterprise is legal and if it should even be there. So to make this business shut down because there's the potential of another business that does not have a permit, that seems to fly in the face of what's supposed to happen here. We have established that our client has regularly and consistently applied, been in contact with, and operated this business for a while. We're just asking that it be allowed to do so. We understand the context of everything. We get it. But at the same time, the rules and procedures matter. They have operated, they've invested substantially in this business, and they should be allowed to continue. If there are other issues, the proper means of doing it is through a nuisance action or whatever. Those are the issues that we can address. But by using this tool and subsequently seeking to take someone's property to shut them down is not the way to go. We would ask that the grandfathering and what's been going on since the 1970s, allowing this business to operate, continue. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I have permission to say something and speak to one of those comments?
Speak freely.
I just wanted to clarify that this board, not with the current makeup, but has existed for the purposes of exemptions and appeals. Their terms had simply expired, so this is a newly appointed board, but the board itself has existed. So.
Points of the parties in council are well taken. Both sides have presented compelling cases. As to the ultimate issue, the question is, did the director under our bylaws have the authority to revoke this license? There's been evidence presented that there are, in fact, dwellings as defined in our bylaws within 1,000 feet. And it's pretty compelling evidence. We have visual plus Tarrant County Appraisal District evidence, some of which suggests that there were dwellings going back to the 1950s. Unfortunately, we don't have the benefit of knowing exactly when the original permit was applied for, but that would be, in my understanding of the bylaws, a reason that we could uphold the revocation. But also evidence has been put on that this is, in fact, regardless of the permit number itself, it has been reapplied for, there had been failures in renewal, and it would properly fall under the most recent regulations. So with all of those things in mind, and those are our primary considerations, are there residences within 1,000 feet? There has been ample evidence put on that that is the case, but I'd like the impression of the rest of the board before I say anything further.
I think an important factor here is their delay in 2022 with respect to the grandfathering and not submitting their application in a timely manner, and that portion of the prior statute no longer applying or having less of a factor on this. So that's an important consideration in my mind.
I agree. Based on the evidence, there are dwellings within, it appears to be within 1,000 feet. The business has applied for a new application, which I feel that it is not grandfathered because this is a new application because of some of their failures to uphold their renewals. So that is my stance on it.
I would concur with that. I think that grandfathering is irrelevant in this case because of the new application, and it's very clear based on GIS evidence and on-the-ground survey that we have a number of residences that are within that 1,000 feet.
Well, at this time, the chair would entertain a motion to uphold the revocation of the appellant's business license.
I'll second that.
Say aye.
And we'll take now a vote. Do we vote? Does the board vote to revoke the license? I say aye.
Aye. Aye.
With that, this business regarding this permit is concluded. There is still one more item for the board to consider. I believe new regulations.
Members of the board, if I could just briefly, I have a proposed order for the board to sign off on. I will bring a copy to council here momentarily, and for the board, if I could just ask the board to sign off on that before adjourning today.
Can you please present the order?
Yes, I'll get it now and be back momentarily.
In the meantime, we will, while we're waiting on the order, I believe that we have new regulations that the board is to consider.
Thank you.
Would the rest of the members like to have a chance to read with this? I'm comfortable with the language. Yeah.
And this is under section 3 on page 9.
Oh, I'm
Oh, sorry.
sorry. I'm going back to old business, but we
Oh,
do have
sorry.
to issue an order. I've
sorry, yeah,
reviewed the
yeah.
order. It seems consistent with our ruling. If y'all would like to read it, feel free to do so.
And if the board requires more
Oh,
copies,
this is just the revocation.
Yeah,
not
that's
new-
the
okay.
order on item B.
Yeah.
So is the board comfortable with the right? All right, with that, I will go ahead and execute this order, and we will all sign and provide this to council. I ask council to make copies for the appellant and to provide notice as however is provided in the bylaws of this board.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Now, with that concluded, we can move on to item C, discussion concerning revised sexually oriented business regulations approved by the Commissioners Court on Tuesday, June 6, 2023. Mr. Manius, is there a presentation regarding this? I'm not entirely sure. Are we to adopt it, or are we just to be made aware of what's being changed? Or?
What this is, the Commissioners Court adopted these new regulations on June 6th, and we simply wanted to make sure that you had a copy of them.
Okay, so there is nothing to review or
No presentation.
no presentation. Well, okay, with that,
Your Honor, may I recommend that the board receive the new regulations into your minutes so you have a record of it?
yes, it will. Under advisement, we will receive these regulations into the minutes of this meeting. And with that, do we have any issues for closed session? I don't believe we do. Is there any, I guess we have public comment now, if there is any.
You might take a vote on the motion to receive.
Oh, yes, that's probably a good idea. Is there a motion to receive these new regulations of this board into the minutes of this meeting?
Motion to receive.
Motion. Second.
Okay. So vote in the affirmative. Aye.
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 Can I make one comment or recommendation? And certainly the Commissioners Court doesn't have to take it into consideration, but with respect to Section 3.1D1, there are other places within the state of Texas that allow for 1,500 feet within a licensed daycare, center, church, residential neighborhood, school, public park, or other SOB. And this is 1,000 feet. And they may want to consider what other places have done and allow for 1,500 feet and allow for, with respect to keeping property values in mind and all the other considerations.
And Ms. Manius, if you would inform the board of that recommendation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure.
Now, with that, I believe that item is finished, and closed session is not necessary for this hearing.
That's correct, Your Honor. I would offer a recommendation that the court at least consider public comments. If anybody wanted to make a public comment, now would be an appropriate time to do it. It's not on the agenda, but I think you can certainly do so.
And is there anyone that has a desire to comment on these regulations? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. And I believe the only other item for this is adjournment at this point, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Motion. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Motion to adjourn this meeting.
A second.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. This meeting is adjourned.